Hello, everyone. Good to be with you today. I want to dive into the fundamentals of our current structure with ministry and its tie into occupational ministry, which means, not only a pastor, giving their heart and their life to teach and to equip, to train, but they're doing it for compensation. And the biblical basis that we have for this actually is in contradictory terms with the current arrangement. I know many pastors don't want to hear that, but if you look at the Bible and you start to dissect and understand the people that did ministry, 98% of them all had a different job. So we could go through Genesis all the way through, Revelation, and the only example of the people that just ministered to God was, the Levites, the tribe of Levi, and they exclusively got a different treatment, a differential treatment. The Old Testament example of what they were to participate in, God was providing for them, and He gave their allowance. And that is our, I guess, current foundation for how every ministry should be. Even though Jesus was a carpenter, Paul was a tent maker, you had so many apostles that all had jobs. There were fishermen, there were shepherds. David was a shepherd. You've got people that were even politicians and kings, and they were cupbearers, bread makers, bakers. Maker of fine purple linen. The list goes on and on and on. And like I said, 98% of the people that did some form of ministry in the New and Old Testament all had a real job. What do I mean by that? Well, they had something that it was a trade or profession or craft that they could give their time to, that they earned their money from. And they were able to minister out of a place of abundance, and they weren't tying in a financial requirement for that ministry. Because here's the big juxtaposition that we have. We get a minister, a pastor today, and we elevate them into this full-time, quote-unquote, full-time role because they're giving all their time to it, so therefore we should be paying them. And now what happens to the church if they need to go through inner healing? What happens to the church if they need to, deal with their sin? What happens to the church if they need to, take a break because of burnout? Their occupation is on the line. Their finances are on the line. The current arrangement doesn't allow for that to happen. And so, they continue in their sin. They continue in their burnout. And their marriages and their families, fall apart if they need help and they are not able to get it. And we've I guess concluded this idea. I think the Catholic Church really gave us this idea. Let's appoint one person and make them in charge of the church. And it's not actually something you see in the New Testament. I know many of you are like, well, what about when Jesus says to Peter, "You're the rock, and on this rock I'm going to build my church"? Jesus was referring to the revelation that he was the Son of God. It was on that rock that he was building his church. The church is not built on the foundation of Peter. That's a clear misinterpretation of that verse. And you're like, well, what about gatherings? Well, even the Apostle Paul, when he's speaking and somebody falls through the roof because, there's so many, it was more of a community. This was a conversation that was happening. And it was a really engaging one at that because it was full and there were so many people and somebody fell through the roof or off the roof. But it wasn't the traditional modern day church that we see today. That wasn't the case. So what does that mean for us? Well, it means that because we've tied in this hierarchy for our pastors, for our leaders, to have a financial benefit to do ministry, then we are tying in the underbelly of making sure that they have a job, or their pursuit is to keep their job. And if they're financially benefiting off of their ministry efforts, then you're going to get manipulation, you're going to get coercion, you're going to get prosperity gospel, you're going to get, self-appointed agenda. You're going to get whatever the human soul and mind can produce to personally benefit. Now, the other side of this, because I hear the whispers in my ear right now, the other pastors are like, what about, well, how am I supposed to do this full time and not get paid? And that is the perfect question, because the construct of today's church isn't set up for success in that way. There's so many other models that could work, like perhaps a kingdom model where the church actually operated like a sevenfold business, and it ran a coffee shop, it ran a bookstore, it rented out event space during the week, it provided a wedding venue, it provided cleaning services. Different businesses could give, here's another idea, different businesses could give a percentage of their their referral credits that they get from the church back to the church, and then it's self-sustaining. It's taking care of itself. And then guess what? You need a pastor that needs to deal with some stuff, needs to go through inner healing, needs to get some therapy, needs to get some time off, is burned out. Great. Awesome. The church tithe structure and the whole, system around that doesn't need to sustain that decision. There's alternative structures that facilitate that, because what we have today in church is we have three elements that you would get from church. You've got teaching, you've got community, and you have worship. And for the large majority, you can get your teaching and your worship. I understand corporate worship is different, but outside of the church. And so you've got to find your community. Like, we have these podcasts. You can listen to podcasts all day. You can listen to worship all day. You don't have to go to a building. So what are we getting in these buildings? What are we getting in this, this particular brick and mortar location? Well, we're getting a religious routine that feels good. But we're financially incentivizing people, we're paying people to present a moral good to us. It's interesting. It's really interesting, because there's so many other ways that we could structure church where it brought about health for the community, and then obviously we're able to incentivize people that come in and bless us, but it's not this mega church model where it's like, how fast can you grow? How many people can you have? Like, that was never the idea. That was never the goal, to see how many stadiums we could fill up and speak and preach and take an offering. It's just like, it's such an American concept. It definitely wasn't present in the New Testament, which is very interesting, because we all want to think that it was, especially our seminaries. Again, it's a job, because you can have, Jesus walking around as a carpenter, and he changed the whole world. But he was a carpenter. Why was he a carpenter? Well, we understand why. There's symbolic reasons behind that as well, and what he was able to design with wood, which represents humanity and represents Israel. The children of God, us, and he was able to fashion it into a cross, and there's so many, wonderful parallels we could find within his occupation, why he chose that. But even his disciples, every single one of them had an occupation that they participated in, that they went back to. And that was health. That was a benefit. It wasn't, well, we just started a new career path. Everybody becomes the Pope. Where they should be taken care of, and just paid for, and doesn't matter what they do. They can do what they want. Let them do what they want. That's the pastor. He's the anointed one. Let him do what he wants. And I am 100% for people getting blessed or getting paid for their service. Like, I have some books. There's some books. I'm a writer, and I sell books to teach people different things. The Learning How to Love is a 90-day devotional about relationships, and people go through that book, and their relationships are perfected. And so they're learning tools, from me and my wife. My wife's a doctor in psychology. So many wonderful aspects, scripturally based as well, but life skills to do relationships better, It's worth the money. It's better. It's like 10% of a life coaching session, And then this one over here, my emotions journal, same thing. It's like 14 years of trial and error and perfected process and, strategy in terms of actually diving into learning about your emotions and how do you sort them and how do you answer the questions they have and how do you find, reasonable solutions that give you a message and an action on your emotions. It's incredible. And those are resources. Those are tools. It's like making a tent, it's practical. And I'm all for that. And then even I'm all for like people blessing for you showed up, you flew out of your way, blessing somebody. Here's a gift, awesome, fantastic. But if it's my job and that's my only source of income for you to donate to me, I wrote a book and I published it with HarperCollins. It's called Ways of Prosperity. There's 153 Ways of Prosperity, and in that book I did a third because it was so big. And the reason why I mention that is because one form of prosperity, and there's sevenfold of prosperity, spirit, soul, your physical body, community, relationships, finances, of course, are different aspects of prosperity, and there was another. But one form is, begging people for donations. That's one form of prosperity. And unfortunately, the majority of the church is kind of in that mode with like paying for their occupational pastor. Every time they get up on Sunday, they're going to tell us we need to give. Give to them, give to the kingdom. And what is it going to? Well, it's going to keep the lights on or pay for this building that, is too expensive or pay for the pastor's lifestyle, And, of course, you have those, para-church, ministries that are totally different where they don't have a church, but they're just happy to take your money, right? There's no building, but they're definitely happy to take your money and put it in their house, or their house is, and that's a reality too. And I'm not saying that they're not worthy of receiving a blessing, but I would like to say that there's different models that are more healthy and more successful for how we can do ministry today than for us to have this, I would call it a crooked path for trying to see what we can get out of the people of God to fund our personal agenda and to fund our personal movements and to fund our personal lives. There's a reason why 98% of all biblical ministers had a different job. They had a real job. And I love the people that are devoted to do ministry, but there's so many options today. Imagine this. Imagine a pastor who's a really good teacher. Imagine they put together a course, and they've got a book. And everybody that wants to join their church, can pay to go through the course, and it teaches them. And it's an exhaustive teaching, wonderful teaching, foundations of faith, or, some aspect of life. And everybody that joins the church is invited to take this course, and you pay to that. And that particular pastor's entire lifestyle is covered because he made a course and he sold a book. And that's how easy it is. And then guess what happens to the church? The burden is removed from having to fund this person's lifestyle and having to fund, the new building fund. And there's an opportunity for the church to have a self-sustaining, profitable model where it can grow continuously over time with the right structure, the right implementation, where they're operating more so like a profitable entity, and they care about their finances, they care about their expenses, they care about their inflows and their outflows, and they have somebody in charge that actually knows what they're doing. And then it becomes a really wonderful, profitable thing, and it doesn't just become a drain, a swamp, What if there's a really incredible church and they started a school, and they started an in-person school, or they started a daycare during the week, and the funds from the daycare, because it serves a practical need, actually pay for the facility and they pay for the church? What if a church put in a restaurant that people ate at, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and the proceeds from the restaurant paid for everything that happens in the church? Wouldn't that be more of a successful model, than to feel like every time you go up to church, you have to donate to keep your pastor employed, and he is, or she is, completely relying on your donation for his family's survival, and he'll do anything to get your donation, perhaps maybe even bend the rules a little bit, or treat you differently, or manipulate the scripture a little bit to see what he can get or she can get. I'm not saying every pastor has ill will towards, trying to see what they can get. I'm not saying every church does it this way. I'm simply saying it creates an open door for problems because the current infrastructure doesn't allow for health long term, in my opinion. I think there's better ways to do it. And the reason why we see big problems today in different ministries, 501c3s, parachurches, is because we allow this structure to continue. And as a person who has been in the church for years and years and years, we allow it to continue, and we're happy to just continue. And when somebody comes in our city and they take up an offering and we give the money to the kingdom, we're giving the money to them, and they're going to rework it. It's a little eye-opening when you realize that all the celebrities also have 501c3 churches as well, because of the structure that's provided to them. And are they actually doing church? No, they're not doing church. Maybe they're doing a meeting, but they've just found another way to move money. And when it comes back down to it, at the end of the day, there's a lot of creative people that have found ways to make money off of the kingdom, make money off of God, and we don't have any, there's no accountability. We don't have any, there's no questions. Nobody's asking any questions. Nobody's saying, let me show me where that money went. It's never going to happen. There's only a couple ministries that I think of that post their financial statements. Most you never see it because it goes to the invisible kingdom, right? Thank you so much for joining me on today's rant. But hopefully it was helpful, because I think there's ways that we could do church better, and maybe something more along the lines of the biblical church pattern that we saw.